Hey Jim, do you have,
Yes.
All right, well,
Jim, do we have any Wi-Fi information back here? Even the guest requires a username and a
so
password.
that's a good question for our staff. Is there a Wi-Fi?
I guess.
Yeah, even the Central County guest pulls up requiring
Yes,
a
it does.
username and password. So that's all right. I can use my Wi-Fi off my phone.
We'll get someone to help you in just a
No
minute.
problem.
1, 2, 3, 4, A, B.
There you go.
I'm going to say, first of all, thank you all for taking time. I know this is close to Christmas and everyone's extremely busy. Friday afternoon, again, it's extremely busy. But I just think that this is such an important topic. I've been tracking for a number of years now that it's time for us to kind of dust off our ideology and dust off the issues and problems and kind of get back to what we need to do as a state to maybe address some of the issues that we're seeing as a state. And so thank you for taking time to be here. Just real quickly, I know there may be a few more people coming, and I hope that they do. I know that we invited a lot of people, and if they show up, we'll just continue to invite them. We potentially might have as many as twice as many people as we see right now if they just keep coming in. But right now, just a way of getting started. Just if you wouldn't mind, just start. How about let me just get started here. We'll go around the table. My name, of course, is Jim Howell. I'm one of the Sedgwick County Commissioners and interested in juvenile justice reform. That's why we're here today. So thank you for being here.
I'm Tom Stoltz, I'm Sedgwick County Manager. I'm Kevin Smith, I'm a Sedgwick County District Court Judge assigned to the criminal department.
District Judge. David Dennis, Sedgwick County.
Daniel Blank, Watkins Public Strategies.
I'm Cindy Howerton, State Rep for District 98.
Stephen Owens, State Rep for the 74th House District.
Rick Macias, I'm a district court judge. I'm assigned to the juvenile court division.
Silas Miller, Representative elect for District 86.
Jay Hendrick, board member for Gathered Incorporated.
I'm Kristen Peterman. I'm with DCF.
Holly Osborne, Vice President of Permanency for St. Francis Ministries.
Erica Case, St. Francis Ministries Legal.
Valerie Leon, Regional Vice President, St. Francis Ministries.
Matt Stevens, Vice President of Foster Care Homes for St. Francis Ministries.
Leah Howell, Representative-elect for District 82.
Mario Salinas, Deputy Director for Sedgwick County Department of Corrections.
So if you are recognizing, we have a bunch of legislators here today. We have the chairman of the what was your
Chairman of Corrections and Juvenile Justice.
Chairman of Corrections and Juvenile Justice. And is there any other legislators on that committee that are here? Yeah. Silas, you know your assignments still?
We still don't know yet.
Okay,
We'll find out any day.
hopefully. I do want to recognize Silas, though. He has shown a natural organic interest in this. He's from Sedgwick County, obviously, but I really appreciate him being here. We represent both sides of the aisle. We need your help on moving this forward. This is not a Republican or Democrat issue. This is about helping the kids. And so with that, we truly need people from both sides of the aisle to be here. So thank you for taking time to do that today.
Thanks for inviting.
We have people from the court system, from the district attorney's office, from our corrections office, from DCF, from St. Francis. Actually, let me just credit Holly. Holly and I have been having a conversation for quite a while now. This meeting started out by her and I talking about some of the issues of House Bill 2200 that we talked about last year. And so Holly and I have been wanting to get together, and we just thought, we should meet. Let's not meet just you and me. Let's meet with some other people too. And that's the genesis of today's meeting. So thank you, Holly, for doing this today. And you have some of your staff today is from Salina. All right, who's the furthest person traveled to Salina today, or anybody else? Where are you from?
Salina.
Salina, very good. I think you're still in the other room. There's still okay.
Yeah.
I know there's still more people here.
Yeah.
So there's some other folks from St. Francis are going to be coming in here in just a minute. I think even President Masterson might show up here, right? We think so. Anyway, also recognize Ryan Beatty, Commissioner-elect for Sedgwick County Commission. So thank you for being here as well. So with that, I just kind of way to get the ball rolling. I gave you guys some paperwork. You have a copy of last year's bill and a copy of the supplemental note that went with that, kind of explained at a high-level summary of what that bill did. You have a roundtable discussion happened 13 months ago that we had here in Sedgwick County. We had some really good people at the table. We had an excellent conversation. We came up with 5 initiatives. Then we testified in Topeka on House Bill 2200. In fact, I recognize Judge Kevin Smith testified in favor of that bill. I went up there and testified in favor of House Bill 2200. I actually have a couple of ideas I would add to that bill if I have opportunity. Some of the things that have been in the news lately. And so anyway, I think it's a good starting point. I'm not saying this bill is perfect, but it certainly is a good place to start. In my own words, I'll just say this. The reason I'm interested in this bill is I think our juveniles don't have any consequences for what they do. And we are leaning on the foster care system to do something that the corrections system should be in charge of. We're conflating foster care and corrections in a way that's actually harming our kids. And as a consequence, I think a lot of these kids are not getting the correction that they need when they're fixable. And we're actually hurting some kids because of the way we're handling some of these issues. And so that's my very high level discussion of what I think, why I'm here today. As a way to get this ball started, I've asked Christina Smith. Christina Smith, did you come up here closer? You can stand anywhere you like. She is a mom in Sedgwick County who has a personal story she would like to share. Just speak nice and loud and tell us your story. We'll give you a few minutes to do that, and let's see if there's any questions, okay? By the way, you have a copy of her testimony. You can read along with her if you like.
On September 3rd, while recovering from ACL surgery, my oldest son threatened to kill me if I sent him back to the psychiatric residential treatment. After aggressively shoving me up against the wall, I tried to call 911 for assistance. When he saw what I was doing, he grabbed my phone and threw it as hard as he could across the room where it went through the wall. I was 4 days post-op, on crutches, non-weight bearing, and my surgery knee was locked in extension. For my safety, I went from our living room to my room. My 15-year-old, who's 6'1" and 160 pounds, pushed past my 70-year-old mother to willfully and brutally attack me after he yelled that if I was going to report him for assault, he would show me assault. I want to thank the people here today for taking time to listen to my voice. My name is Christina Smith. I am a single mom, a nurse, and a part-time student. I live daily with multiple autoimmunes that contribute to me being physically disabled. My life revolves around my 3 boys. We have lived in Sedgwick County since 2014. With dedication, I have fought every day to make sure our life is better for my sons, making sure they received every service they qualify for in Sedgwick County. The last 4 years, I have unknowingly and directly been impacted by Bill 367 that passed into law in 2016. These years have been a path of terror. Bill 367 allows grace for juveniles to make mistakes, but this law has put my life in danger more times than I can count. This last year, my oldest son was empowered by the lack of consequences for his ever-increasingly violent behavior due to this leniency. We tried every service from therapy, mental health services, medication, and the SCD waiver. Despite all of this, he had multiple acute and 1 long-term psychiatric hospitalization. Still, my child's behavior continued on a trajectory path of violence, which put my family's safety at risk. The DA continuously chose not to press charges because they said that there was no substantial evidence of my son's continued behavior. The DA did not know that even though I had called the police many times for assistance, for everyone's safety, my son would threaten to do me worse harm if he was ever booked in JAG. Our family's life was filled with insults, put downs, foul language, threats to be harmed or killed. Bill 367 ensures that juveniles, unless they are involved in a violent crime, are never actually charged and never convicted. No real consequences happen. The situation just escalates until the system has no other options. Leaving the violent child offender in the same environment does not make things better. Placing the violent child offender in foster care system along with children that lack parents is misguided. Foster care should be reserved for child in need of care. Seek kids are those that have been abused or neglected, which does not describe my oldest son at all. A minimum of 4 charges of battery were filed against my son in the last year. All charges were dropped because of Bill 367. Our lies consisted of him threatening to turn me in for abuse on a daily basis, holding DCF as leverage. He was empowered to continue to hurt us since DCF only acted on his behalf without regard to my safety as a single physically disabled parent. I had no voice. I was scared, alone, with no help from those sworn to protect and serve. Within my family, Bill 367 protected the very person who sought to harm me and my youngest 2 children. His increasingly violent behavior became brutal after I had surgery. Nonetheless, because of Bill 367, he is free of accountability. As a parent, I was forced to choose between 2 options: to be battered and or possibly killed, or to refuse to bring my oldest son home after getting him psychiatric help. On September 28th, my son was released from St. Joe's Mental Health Hospital. For the life and safety of my 2 youngest children and myself, I refused to pick him up. I paid the consequences for his willful choices when I was charged with child abandonment by the Wichita PD, and my violent son was placed in foster care. My son's charges for his violent attack and threats to kill me on September 3rd included assault, battery, and criminal property damages. These charges were dropped by the DA on November 8th, and I think this is because of Bill 367 removed the DA's options regardless that there was video evidence. How many people like me must choose between life-threatening violence in the home or to be charged with child abandonment, which then threatens losing their other children? What are we teaching juveniles in Sedgwick County? Willfully violent juveniles are empowered by the lack of consequences for their actions. In the last year, Bill 367 has caused my family not only to lose our home, subjected us to constant attacks, severe financial strain. It has not only, and most importantly, stripped us of all right to safety and protection. Bill 367 protected my oldest son and empowered him to terrorize his 2 little brothers, his grandmother, me, and my service dog. My name is Christina Smith, a mother with a deep love for her 3 sons. I am not only a survivor, but a thriver, who not only believes in grace, but for accountability. Please put common sense back into the law. Thank you for hearing my voice today.
Thank you, Christina. So let me just say a couple things real quickly. I appreciate her taking time to be vulnerable and to share her story. There's a lot more she could say. Let me just say this, District Attorney, I don't think there's any intention to blame the District Attorney or the Sheriff or Corrections Department. I think they're doing exactly what they can do. I might say also the courts. These are agencies that are doing everything they possibly can do under the Kansas laws as they're currently written. It's just that we have limited their options as a state. Let me say also, I don't think 367 is a terrible law. I think it has some flaws. I think it needs to be improved. But 367 by itself is not intended to cause these consequences. I think these are unintended consequences that are happening as a result of a pretty good law. But it maybe went a little bit too far by tying the hands of our courts and tying the hands of our district attorney and tying the hands of our corrections. And again, as I said earlier, I think foster care is taking the brunt of the issues that are created by 367 ends up in foster care. As a consequence, a lot of foster parents have decided to stop being foster parents because they have bad placements. Criminogenic youth are being placed in the foster care. When they're expecting a child in need of care, they've got a violent offender in their home. And so that has done some damage to the foster care system. So again, as I said earlier, I don't think that this law was 100% bad or anything like that. I think what we ought to do is look at the deficiencies in the law that, as we sit as a state today, and make new, refreshed effort to address some of the things in there. So if you look at that stakeholder discussion paper I handed out, you can certainly read through that, but there's 5 action items at the end that came out of that meeting. And I don't know if anybody would want to speak to any of these or want to add to these, but I'd like to have a fresh conversation as to, what are we feeling today? Each one on the table today has subject matter expert knowledge. I'd like to have everyone here share their perspective and add to the conversation. I'd like to Chairman Owens. Go ahead.
Yeah, so the first thing that comes to mind, and this is an incredibly impactful story, but SB 367 only works if there are charges and that child is involved in the criminal justice system. Part of what 2200 actually does is provide resources to children before they're in the system, but as of right now, it's only when they are charged in the system. So if there weren't charges filed in this situation or in others, then that child wasn't receiving any services that would be beneficial as a result of 367. So I just want to make sure that we're understanding how 367 was designed. And if this child did not get services that 367 would have provided due to a lack of charges being filed. And I think that's something we need to look into, or maybe the DA can look into. But certainly don't need answers. I understand juvenile is very different, but I just want to be aware of that first and foremost.
Well, let me confess also, I'm not a subject matter expert. I think everyone at this table knows more about this than I do. I just know I care about the situation.
Sure.
When I hear about the district attorney or the judge is saying, there's nothing we can do. We would like to do something different, but our hands are tied. And that's the words I've heard before. There's things they would like to do. I know when last time we talked 13 months ago, Ron Pascal mentioned, in fact, mentioned the district attorney, I think he even mentioned, we have a car full of kids driving around 4 o'clock in the morning doing some horrible things, and all we do is take them home. If no one actually gets harmed, even though it's very threatening, obviously it's a bad situation, the hands are tied. I mean, there's not a lot of things we can do. So one of the things I'm aware of, and again, please correct me if I'm incorrect, because I don't know the law that well, and I'm just trying to have a conversation here. But one of the things I think we do offer them when we find a troubled child in our system of corrections, juvenile corrections, back to the judges per options here. A lot of times they will recommend, if you will, community-based programming. If they complete that programming, charges may be dropped as a consequence of completing programming that was offered to these children. Consequently, a lot of these kids will not accept that as a solution, and they would rather go to 30 days of detention. At which point, if I understand correctly, the case is closed and sealed, and the kid is basically back to square one again. And if they have a repeat offense, something else happens. It's like it's never happened before. It's like a brand new case, and we don't have any case history. Also, it seems like there's a lack of graduated sanctions, that the judges' hands are tied. They can't provide, if you will, consequences that change with how the severity of the actions that have been done, or because of case history. So, again, I'd like to have, Judge, if you want to clarify what I said and provide some truth to what I just said. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm asking for some expert explanation if you are able to do that, or DA if you want to pipe in that. Either one of you guys would be great to clarify.
Well, you don't have a monopoly on not always knowing what we're doing, because sometimes we don't either. I've been a district court judge for just about 5 years, and so 367 was already in place. So I don't know what life was before that. Judge Smith probably does.
It was better, but go ahead.
Okay. And my understanding is it was probably an answer to some abuses that took place. I mean, for example, when we have a juvenile detention, unless it's a very high level felony, 1, 2, or 3, we have to have this review hearing every 14 days. It really gets kind of annoying, quite frankly. But nonetheless, my understanding, somebody got lost in the shuffle, was detained for a long time. But here's really the biggest problem we have. In any time we're dealing, and keep in mind, we're dealing with the bottom 20% generally of behaviors, okay? 80% of people are doing well, kids are doing well, about 20% perhaps aren't. But it's like anything else when you discipline your children. What is it? We always practice the 3 R's. Any type of discipline that you're going to have to mete out to your kids has to be reasonable. It has to be related to whatever happened. It's got to be done respectfully. But more importantly, or just as importantly, it's got to be timely. If you don't do it timely, then, because we'll have some cases, and unfortunately, COVID caused some problems and so on, but by the time they get through and we're able to there's a plea and a sentence, it might be a year later. Can you imagine for a teenager, your own teenager? Hey, I'm still gonna, I'm gonna bust your chops for what you did a year ago. Oh, it just doesn't work at all. We've got to move things a little bit faster. There's some provisions in there in the statute I'm going to try to follow here beginning in January. The biggest problem that I see is in 367, and you address this case length limits, when we put them on probation. The whole idea is we're trying to be almost a substitute parent sometimes, trying to help these parents, impose some sort of discipline on their child. But the direct commitments, and that's when you could actually send a juvenile to detention where need be. And just so you know, my philosophy is I think I'm there to encourage and inspire. That's what I try first of all. We're not there just, you've been a bad kid and we're going to do that. What's what we try first of all? There's sometimes, and I don't like to send somebody to detention, but there are times we do. I got 3 kids still waiting first-degree murder charges. We've been waiting on that for one of them over a year now, almost 18 months. So we've got to get to those types of things. But the thing about it is, the lower level ones where we have if it's like a felony level 7 to 10, it's only probation that we can give them, and there's some accumulation. Shockingly, one of the crimes that's still a misdemeanor is possession of a firearm. And what do? We got to give them probation. There's nothing we can do about that. So once the word get out, the word actually does get out. Hey, there's nothing they can do to you. So they take the risk, and we see them multiple times having handguns in there. Eventually, there's a cumulative effect where, again, it could be a higher level felony, but it just takes so long to get there. So what we'd like to have is the ability, and again, I'm sure 367 was an answer. It just, that pendulum swings at times. And it's got to be where there's some kids that I just know if we don't get to, they're going to end up downtown, and it's going to be far worse. And so we do the best we can. If we could take and can give judges a little bit more leeway, they right now there's a 45-day limit on the sanctions, 30 days at a time. They can still be on probation, actually, Commissioner, even if they've done a 30-day sanction, unless they've used up all their time. And even if you did, why have them on probation? Because if they violate it, we've already used up the 45 days. Nothing we can also do with it. If we could extend that some, so it actually means something. There was also they implemented this tier where you have to have the technical violations, at least 3 of them before they brought out, and that's probably not all bad, but nonetheless we have to have the ability so it actually means something if we really are going to impose some sort of discipline, which would be detention. Some other things, and I realize we'll get to this a little bit later, but the closing that boys ranch, I'll tell you guys, it's killing us. Sometimes I have detention or send them back home. That's all we got. Residential, the detention is not open. It's a lesser restrictive discipline, as far as detention, but we don't have the personnel, so it's not open. We don't have that available, so it's really kind of all or nothing. And for Ms. Smith, indeed, one of the worst things that we could do is send a child back home who is the victim is the family member. But we have to do that sometimes, or send them over to foster care. And again, as you said, that takes the foster care, which is some desperate resources. We just don't have enough of those. So those are the kind of things that you're right. We don't want to impose the JO offenders on foster care. We've got to have some other placements available. Like I said, I've already said it, the closing the boys' ranch was probably the worst thing that happened for juvenile court. It's
one of the 5 findings of our last meeting was a out-of-home placement that's for, I use the word criminogenic, but kids that are not just sink kids, but they're troubled youth. And they don't fit foster care, obviously, because they're not just sink kids. They don't fit a home environment because that's the environment that got them where they're at. And community-based programming for some reason is not working in this case. And so we have a repeat offender, a out-of-placement home that deals with that type of child might be needed. And that's one of the 5, number 4 on that list. I don't believe that's part of 2200 though. One thing about 2200 it really does, it talks a little bit about case limits. It talks about, it talked about graduated sanctions. talks about turning loose of the savings that we have. I forget what this is called now. Corrections, Mario, you might remember what this is called.
JDFF.
The residential programming, the community-based programming fund, whatever that's called.
Chair.
JRFF.
Yeah.
That fund is increasing and it's ending balance, and I think there's a temptation for the legislature to sweep those funds. And so what 2200 does, it kind of almost forces the state to get those funds back into the community, really for programming though, not necessarily for residential options. So we still have some residential homes in Kansas that are YRC2s. We're seeing kids like Lakeside and the Kinloch Boys Ranch out at Youth Horizons, for example, but those are not intended for criminogenic placements. So if you have a criminogenic youth and you can't find a foster home, where do they stay? DCF? Maybe in the offices. They have no placements. They're out of options. So to Judge Macias's point, I think you have to have a residential option at some point because there is no other reasonable place to put these children. So that's really not why I'm here today. It's about a lot of other issues.
It is.
But this is part of it.
And unfortunately, we've had some of your workers seriously assaulted by some of those jail families. And
Go ahead.
Jeff, now, I want to add something too, because the theory behind Senate Bill 367 is a good theory. And that theory is you shouldn't incarcerate children. But I just want to point out, and I'm glad DA Bennett is here because he can kind of expand on this. The problem is that this kid gloves approach has resulted in an uptick of some very serious crimes. I mean, we're at record levels. We've been at record levels for juveniles detained for murder charges over the last 2 years, and this increase began before COVID hit. So don't even think that it's all about COVID. It's about the way we're handling these juveniles. Immediately, as soon as Senate Bill 367 came through, there was a dramatic increase in the number of motions for adult prosecution. So even if the kids weren't being detained for murder, the DA's office and other parties involved in these courts realized that some of these kids need more resources. So even though they weren't being held for murder, for example, they were still filing motions for adult prosecution so they could kick them over to the adult court that had effectively an unlimited period of time to make sure these kids took advantage of these programs. We're not doing these kids any favors by delaying the point to the degree and delaying the discipline to the degree that they kill people. We're also not doing them any favors whenever we prosecute them as adults. And the current form of Senate Bill 367, that's exactly where we are. And I would like Judge Macias to expand on that, but we're not helping them, in other words, by not satisfying the 3 R's that you mentioned. Bottom line is we have to do that quick, and we can't do it under the current form of Senate Bill 367.
well, I don't want to dominate all this, discussion, but yeah, some of those things. Listen, I think the DA does a good job, and there are times where they do have to file those motions for adult prosecution. And again, it's us judges who then decide should this child be tried as an adult, and there's statutory factors that we have to apply. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. Sometimes they work out arrangements that's satisfactory to both sides. I think the idea is to make sure that we still have that flexibility.
Right.
It just 367. I agree. Probably not a bad thing. I just didn't know life before it. But it's very rigid on what can be done. And there are some times that I hope they could trust us a little bit that, we could see the situation and this child might be eligible for direct placement, but it doesn't fit. You treat them individually instead of as a group. And it's not the easiest to do. We're going to make mistakes. There's some I wish I had back. But nonetheless, if we don't have that flexibility, there's some kids that I just don't think they benefit from going through that system. So.
Let me say, I think that I think the problem we had before and the same problem we have today, it's a one-size-fits-all solution. I think what we need to have is more discretion on the part of the DA, more discretion on the part of the courts, more discretion on the part of the corrections, so that if a child responds well to community-based programming, great, we're saving some money. You fix a kid, it's more efficient and effective for the taxpayers, problem solved. But if you have a child that's much more complicated than that, you need to have options. And if you overcharge the children that don't need it, you're wasting money, you're frustrating everybody involved. But if you undercharge and underprosecute and underhandle kids that frankly need real help, we're not getting them the help they need, these kids will end up in the penitentiary. And people will be victimized along the way. So at the end of the day, we need a broader spectrum of options. And we need to trust some of the people involved in the system the courts, the DA, the corrections, and other people to make the best decisions on behalf of what's best for this particular child. The one-size-fits-all doesn't work when you have a very narrow list of options. You need to broaden the list of options and trust our professionals to make the right decisions.
So if I might, for those of you that don't spend all your time reading these like many of us do, because they are a tremendous amount of fun, let me take a minute if I can and review 2200, what was proposed specifically. And then I want to also recap kind of part of the conversation from our recent Joint Committee on Corrections oversight, where we kind of discussed this bill and some of the concerns that were brought up there. So first of all, House Bill 2200 was introduced 2 years ago, but it didn't get worked until last year when I brought it forward. And the reason that I brought it forward is for this very reason. We knew we needed to make changes. So this was our first attempt at that. So House Bill 2200 did a few things. First of all, it enacted a new section that requires a Secretary of Corrections and the Secretary of Children and Families to enter a memorandum of understanding to coordinate administering a risk and needs assessment to children who have been identified as exhibiting behavior that could lead to an offender behavior during the course of a child in need of care proceeding. It also provided, it's amended to provide that if a child is eligible to receive services from DCF, the Department of Corrections or the judicial branch, those agencies shall collaborate in providing the services. So the first two pieces are literally let's identify and let's work together in solving this. The next piece says removes a provision requiring the Secretary of Children and Families, let's see. Okay, I won't skip that one. It also expands the cumulative detention over the course of the juvenile's case. Currently, that can't exceed 45 days of actual detention. This bill proposed to change that to 90 days, so increasing that cap from 45 to 90. The statute also amended or proposed to amend to provide that the court may extend the overall case length limit to allow for the completion of evidence-based program when a failure to complete the program is due to the delay by a juvenile. So currently under SB 367, that case has a length limit. 12 months, I believe is what it is. When that 12 months is up, it doesn't matter what is going on. That case is over, period, end story. So this provides that if they're going through a program or they haven't completed it, that case can remain open. It also basically said the changes made in this section would provide that when a juvenile is placed on probation, a judge may commit the juvenile to detention for a probation violation, including a technical violation for contempt of court. The length of that time the juvenile may be committed to detention would be 24 hours for a first violation, 48 for a second, or up to 15 days for a third or subsequent. So this is a big shift when you talk about some of those consequences of being able to add some consequences. This is really a big shift because you absolutely don't currently have any authority like that. It also required the Kansas Juvenile Justice Oversight Committee to explore methods of exchanging confidential information between all parts of the juvenile justice system. And finally, current law allows for expenditures from the fund. And let me step back to understand the fund and why that fund exists. The fund exists because they took the money that when SB 367 passed, we shut down, I believe it was 5 juvenile facilities. And the money that was saved was put into this fund for programming and for other things. This allows those funds to be used for, Current law allows for expenditures from the fund for the development and implementation of evidence-based community programs and practices for juvenile offenders, juveniles experiencing a mental health crisis and their families. This bill would expand that to include children who have been administered a risk and needs assessment and have been identified as needing services. So it's not, once you're in the system, this allows that risk and need assessment to be administered before you're in the system and for the money to be sent over that way. And then requires the grant program to be created for that. So just so you know specifically what 2200 is, how we're planning on expanding it, and what the proposal is to add more of that judicial flexibility. 2 things specifically came up in our oversight committee meeting, and I could pull up the notes specifically, but I know Chairman Baumgartner expressed reservation over the amendments, over those additional penalty pieces. Because what she had recently found out a few weeks earlier was that many of these children who were already in the system weren't receiving the evidence-based programming that they were supposed to be receiving. She actually said only, I think, was 52% were actually receiving the programming. So her concern was, we're going to potentially penalize kids who never even received the programming that they should have received to begin with. So that was really kind of her pushback on that part of the bill. The rest of the bill she was fine with, expanding the use, things like that, but those penalties and expansion of case length limits, that was kind of her concern was, look, in a way almost I get it if these kids have received all the programming they were supposed to have, but the state is failing about half of the kids in giving them what they need. So just for a little added context around kind of the Senate's concerns with that part.
Do we know why the kids are not getting the programming? It's not lack of funds.
No, it's definitely not lack of
It's on
funds.
behalf of the person?
It is state agencies delivering those evidence-based programs, plain and simple.
Okay.
It's not a funding issue because there's still 44 million sitting in the juvenile justice fund to be administered for this. The governor did sweep half of it 2 years ago. Last year, we passed legislation that swept it back. So it is there, but it was just a failure on the part of state agencies to provide those evidence-based services.
Where did you get that information from?
She held hearings, and I'm happy to provide that for you, but she sits on the foster care oversight task force, and they had hearings for a couple of weeks prior to that she brought forth that information.
So Representative Owens, I can speak to that a little bit. I watched that testimony, and it was really, she was talking about the foster care system and those assessments
Okay.
not getting completed, and I think part of it is to what Ms. Smith spoke to is because we have children that don't fit in the foster care system, but we're serving those youth. So what she was talking about with the assessments not being done were the foster care youth,
Okay.
not necessarily the juvenile offender
Okay.
youth, which illustrates the issue of a foster care system trying to serve JO population, which is not what they were meant to serve.
Absolutely.
So,
And she talked about that specifically, people that were the youth that were getting in trouble, that were literally then being forced into the foster care system, and even foster parents didn't even know the whole reason why. And so, yeah, she did share some of that as well. Thank you for clarifying.
We've said quite a bit so far. I'd like to recognize, I know we've said a lot, and Mark Bennett, our district attorney, maybe is there maybe burden at this point. So I'd like to have you share any feelings or thoughts that you have on this so far, and any recommendations you want to make sure we understand. I'd just like to get your perspective.
Well, I guess the first thing I'd say is I go back to the comments that are already in the stakeholder discussion from last year. My opinions haven't changed. 367 is good for low risk offenders. We don't need interventions. I mean, for the kids who are low risk offenders, not much happens, and that's fine. It can work for moderate risk offenders. Not always, it can, but it was a disservice to the high risk offenders. We tie our system to the charges. So when someone's being pushed or threatened, those are, in the grand scheme of things, minor offenses. They're not, no one shot anybody, stabbed anybody, beat anybody. Our battery charges are based on the harm done, not on the intent or the risk that was posed. Aggravated battery is based on how much harm you actually did. If I push you, it's a misdemeanor battery. If I break your jaw, it's an aggravated battery. If it's just because I happen to catch you just right, it's more serious. And so misdemeanor batteries and misdemeanor offenses are essentially mulligans in the juvenile system now. So there isn't much we can do for them. The judge says, are you going to change your behavior? And the kid says yes or no. The consequence is the same. After 45 days, the case is over with. If they've been in custody all the time. So I don't know what else to offer to this. And I guess I would say, while this wasn't an intended consequence, it wasn't a consequence that wasn't warned about. Yep. But this was, I don't see any point in rehashing the same old ground, but I was pretty vocal when this happened. But we got shut down in the Senate. I would say I give credit to the House for at least giving us a couple days or a couple hours worth of testimony. But eyes cast. We're here we are. I think this happened Bill 2200 is probably as good as we're going to get. But the reality is, money set aside, this, however many millions we've got now in this account is great, but we don't have the systems in place anymore, the infrastructure, because it was all torn down, taken away. I'm not particularly, I don't have much to offer, to be quite honest with you. I've got a friend who's been reaching out to me for the last 6 months, who mirrors her story. His son this is a mental health issue for a lot of these kids. I don't have a damn thing to offer people with mental health. Lock them up or let them go. Those are our options. So I don't know what the hell we do with that, but whether they're 15 or 25 or 45. But I just got back from a session in Tulsa with the feds for the last 3 days, or for 3 days, Monday through Wednesday. All my federal partners and district attorneys' offices all over the country were there. Colorado, the DA from Colorado Springs, or right outside Denver, one of those jurisdictions, over RCU, mentioned that around the same time we did 367, they had their own bill, which arbitrarily caps by a percentage of population the number of kids who can be in JDF at a given night. So 17 is his number. And he says when they hit 17, if they have another murder that night, then he has to decide which of the 17 that are there are the least dangerous to his community, because one of them has to go out, one has to come in. It's like a bartender or a bouncer at a bar. One man in, one man out. Because it's, we whatever. I don't have anything, I'm not in a good place to offer you much hope. I hope this works. But what we need are programs. And we don't need programs for kids who, get fist fights in the playground or push each other in the hallway at school. But we need programs for kids who push their parents, who are having mental health problems. And the juvenile justice system is not equipped for that. The child needed care system sure as hell isn't equipped for that. Much any more so than we could, let's hang around here until about 5 o'clock tonight. Let's all take a walk up Broadway. See how many of you have the nerve to walk with me all the way to 13th Street. And let's see if we're having anything to help the system for those folks either, the adults that are out there. So I'm sorry, Jim, I'm not pushing
Can
that.
I ask a more detail? I know Commissioner Dennis has to go in just a minute, and maybe some others have to leave here soon, but can you please talk a little bit about two topics that I think Judge Smith alluded to a little bit? How has the motions for adult prosecution changed, and can you please explain why that happened? And then second of all, the types of crimes we're seeing amongst our youth. I know we talk about how many kids are on murder charges. That's a bigger number we've ever seen before. He said it was record level. Can you please describe that demographic and how that's changed, maybe as a consequence of some of these?
I mean, that was actually one of the big topics of discussion. Try to have this whole thing in Tulsa was how to reduce violence in American cities, and there was a specific afternoon spent on reduction of youth violence in cities. So this is a thing that's happening across the country. It is, I don't know if anyone knows exactly why it is, but it is coincidental. Yes, COVID, may have had a impact on that, but it's also somewhat significant that many of these sort of bills changed that hampered states' abilities to react to violence among youth, very much like 367. So that all of that's in play. In terms of motions for adult prosecution, yes, they have gone up. When a 17-year-old is about to age out of the system, and I'm looking at him thinking he's gone from bad behavior at school to whatever, to now he's used a gun, not just carried one, but used it on another person. Frankly, there's very little we can do in the juvenile system to that kind of a kid. We may map them up, we call it motion for adult prosecution, map them up to adult court, not to send them to prison, but at least put them in adult probation, where they put on probation for 36 months. And now an adult court judge, Smith, can do what juvenile court judge Smith couldn't do, and have them go through certain things, certain programs, etc. Require a GED, go into job training, things like that are not available when we're really watching a clock in juvenile more than anything else. But in terms of the violent crimes, yes, the motions for adult prosecution have gone up in terms of homicides, things like that. We've always looked at juvenile offenders who commit murders for an adult referral of. We don't always. I mean, sometimes there are situations in the home and situations with the kid that, I'm thinking lots of cases where we kept them as juveniles because what was going on contextually was their reaction to a different situation. But for the kids who have done murder, no, it's not uncommon. It's just that they're more and more and more than they were before. I think the last, what Judge Macias, maybe 11, something like that in the last 2 years.
Something that sounds about right, yeah.
And that's a lot of kids.
Yeah.
One more thing I think that's related to that is we see the actual types of charges that are being doled out to juvenile that do bad things in the community, but the charges that are ultimately levied and then the types of prosecutions that might actually get into a juvenile court. We look at these numbers from community-based programming and say that's very successful because all these things have declined. On paper, the crimes have just plummeted. We see huge success by changing the juvenile justice system to 367. All the successes are noted because all the demographics are just plummeting down. But the reality is there's a lot of things that are not being charged because, again, maybe the community-based programming is a great solution. It works perfectly. But I don't know that I would say that the crimes or the things that are happening in the community are necessarily not happening. We're just not seeing it on paper because the charges are not levied and the prosecutions are not happening. And we're just dealing with it a different way. So it's a bit of a misnomer. When you look at data and say how great this is, it's not really capturing the whole picture here. Go ahead.
So just two things that I wanted to bring to your attention, and one is a question at the end. First of all, has the county looked at the juvenile crisis intervention centers? Because I heard a little chuckle. So part of that $44 million that's sitting there can absolutely be used for that. And so I know Johnson County has explored it and is in the process of doing some things. I don't know if Sedgwick County has. So that was number one, if somebody wants to speak.
I think Jay Hedrick may have something to say about this.
I for sure do.
Good.
I apologize. My heart rate is pretty high right now. It's very upsetting. My apologies. To hear folks speak about these humans who are affected by Senate Bill 367. I was a case manager in foster care when it went into play. Quickly, it was evident that Senate Bill 367 was having a huge impact on the children that we were serving. When the children who needed to be served by the juvenile justice system were, my word from Jay Hedrick, dumped into the foster care system. I was extremely frustrated as a new case manager because people in wherever were making decisions that impacted selfishly my life because I cared for these children and I was responsible for them. Some of the children that I was responsible for were very criminally minded or had learned that way because if you know children who are served by juvenile justice, they can hustle real hard and they will do what they need to get what they need. This was not helpful to them. It was not helpful to the children who were abused and neglected, sometimes generationally by their family, and had learned that from their family as well. It was not helpful to the DAs. It was not helpful to law enforcement. It was not helpful to the judges, from my opinion, of course. It was not helpful. I keep hearing community programming, community services, community. What is this magical community programming and services that you're speaking about? Because today I can tell you, even if it's the best magical unicorn program in Sedgwick County, there's a waiting list because it's a good program, because they do good work, because they care about the humans that are involved. Senate Bill 367 really, my words again, took the teeth out of our ability to provide appropriate programming to children and the people who provide that service to those children. I very publicly say frequently that Senate Bill 367 killed Cedric Lofton. And I know that that's a big thing to say, but I will continue to say that. What we need in our community is not, you're gonna have to back way up past the 17-year-olds that are murdering people or the 14-year-olds that are murdering people. You need to support, I belong to this community, we need to support the families when things are starting to go bad. We need to provide them with adequate tools that are not only, therapeutically aligned with trauma-informed care, but we need to make sure that it's factual and that it's will help them build on and to thrive into their community and into their life. It's real cool and honestly real cute that we can put a family through a program, they check the boxes, we're done, bam, thank you, they're gone. What happens after that? Were they provided the tools to continue to thrive and be a productive member of society, or are we just gonna pat ourselves on the back? Yay, we helped another one, community services. I'm very passionate about this. Prevention is where we're gonna be able to help people. I'm sure House Bill 2200 is great, and honestly, again, my own personal response is, if it's so great, why didn't it pass?
Well, I can speak to that specifically.
So I just want to make sure that while we're talking about community programming and all of these things, that's cute. But if you haven't been a part of that, if you haven't sent 17 referrals for one child to try to get them in somewhere, come with me. I'm happy to walk alongside you as you try to get a child, not even a super violent child, into the services that they need. And then if you are magically accepted into this program, who are the providers that are giving that that care? Is it trauma focused? Are we really making sure that this is what this child needs to help them grow into a good, productive member of society? Or are we just gonna, again, pat ourselves on the back? Yay, they got into insert whatever service provider program you would like to. So yes, sure they can get assessed at JIAC, but JIAC's gonna turn around and send them right back to this poor mother in 3 hours if you're lucky. My kind of apologies.
I'll add one thing, that having been up there during the passage of 367 and gotten into some terse conversations while it was being contemplated, there was one fundamental concept I think that overrode the whole thing, and that is, there is a notion, there's Mark Twain said there's statistics and damn lies or something. It's a great quote, but I can't summon it on 3 o'clock on Friday. But there's a statistic that is a true statement, and that is that the number one predictor of future imprisonment is one night stay in JDF. They can show that if you stay one night, then you're higher risk. That may be true. I would also point out that it ignores dozens of other contextual situations that have nothing to do with that overnight stay. But that was rammed down our throats over and over and over again by the proponents. And as a result, that was the overarching goal of 367, was to make sure no kid went to JDF. Okay, I get that. But I'll also tell you, I had a very good friend who talking, and he told me something I didn't know. He had been convicted as an 18-year-old on possession of cocaine or facilitating distribution. He worked on the bar, and the guy walked up and said, "Hey, you know where I can buy something?" Well, I don't, but I think that cook sells it to everybody. That turned out as an undercover cop. He popped both the cook and my buddy who sent it to him. He went before a judge, and he just started telling me the story, and I said, "Carl Friedel." And he was shocked. He said, "How did you know?" I said, "Well, I've heard the speech. It was the key speech." And any lawyer in Wichita knows who was of a certain age remembers Carl Friedel. And he looked at each kid and he said, "You hold the key to your future in your hand." And he got up this old jailhouse key, this old skeleton key. And he said, it was this long-winded speech. And I'll be honest with you, I sat and listened to it 500 times in the years I was in front of him and thought, frankly, nobody's listening to this. My buddy said, he gave me that speech and gave me 1 shot of probation. He said, I went out that night, or that morning, as soon as I walked out of the courthouse, went straight to the locksmith on Market, walked over and bought the biggest key I could have, wore it, and a chain around my neck every morning for 25 years when I got out of the shower. I looked at it and remembered that. My point is, sometimes the Dutch uncle speech, sometimes a night in custody, sometimes a little tough love can actually make a difference. And 367 absolutely strips the judge's ability to do that. And 45 days, 90 days, whatever, and if it's a kid who really needs something, you got to file on we're not filing those. By the way, our numbers of filings are half of what they were pre-COVID.
Right.
We're not doing it. I mean, what's the point of bringing a family in and putting them all through this just to have the kid go, well, nothing I can do. And the kids looking around, the parents are looking around, go, man, you did more harm than good. So we're not doing that. Literally, we're half of the cases we were before. We're only focusing on the ones that we're worried someone's going to die or somebody already did die.
But unfortunately, the number of children in foster care is going up. I mean, it is going up.
And the foster
That's
homes are
where it's
going, and the
going.
foster placement options are going away.
Yes. Yeah.
So your problem is compounding two different ways, right?
Yeah. Our county has 20.1% of all of the children in out of home in the state of Kansas. This county, 20%.
That's
Are out of this
criminal
county.
cases on the adult side. We are 20% footprint in the whole state. But just to I'm saying this for the legislators, you know, if you're going in and trying to fix something, but understand what went into this on the front end 5-6 years ago. You know, I don't know how long you'll keep going here, Jim, but this bill is probably the best start. I'm just saying that we've got to get past this notion that a kid spending a night in jail, a night in the juvenile detention facility is somehow this moment that has now screwed their life forever. And doing everything in our power to strip a judge's ability to do that. I mean, sometimes if that parent, if there was a time when misdemeanor batteries and some of these lower level things, we put a lot of energy into that on the front end to try to keep these kids from going into the adult system. Right now, it's like the ones who aren't really that big of a risk, we don't even bring them into the system. The ones who are, we basically just greenlight them straight to the adult.
Well, and let me add to that too, and I'm sorry, just 1 second. I think one thing that we're ignoring and one thing that report you sent around didn't cover, we're seeing a historic number of murders that are taking place and extremely violent crime that are being taken place. I just got off Warrant Week 2 weeks ago, and I think I had 3. And does anybody want to guess how old those 3 suspects were?
Mm-hmm.
They were all under 21. And if you were to dig deeper, you'd probably find that they were victims potentially of Senate Bill 367 in the juvenile justice system. So we're not doing these kids any favors. We're not doing the system any favors. So it's more than just that. And anyway, that's all I've got. I mean,
Go ahead. I do want
Rick
to,
had something.
if you have to leave, Commissioner Dennis, I'd like to give you a chance to say something before you leave. Yes.
Is this Senate bill or House Bill 2200, are all we're going to do is change it to 23 on here and resubmit this, or what's the plan?
That's our starting point. But I think there's enough information out there. I would not be surprised if you see amendments to maybe further improve the bill. But I think it's a starting point. What I asked our lobbyists to do was to make sure that bill is introduced, pre-filed, so going, and you already know more than I do.
I have it from the reviser in my inbox as of this morning, so I'm already on top of
So there
making
you
sure
go.
that it gets introduced. But I just wanted this committee's support on that.
I think this conversation is going to draw some potential amendments, but we have to start quickly because the session is on our toes right now. So Chairman Owens is a fantastic chair. He's going to get something done this year. We would have gotten done last year, but there was politics I can't even describe here in this room. It caused it to fail. It wasn't really because it was a bad bill.
No.
It's because of some of the people involved in the process. We're gonna block it. They had the power to block it, and there's political reasons why they did so. That problem has been solved now. So Chairman Owens, I believe that you have
I have a much
fire
better-
behind you to get this done, and I want to help you.
No, and I appreciate that because yeah, you're absolutely right. This bill last year made it out of our committee to the House floor. The majority leader had agreed to hear it, but our former Speaker Pro Tem is the one that blocked it. For anybody that's worked in the legislature, understands the process, there's a million ways to kill a bill and very few ways to get it through. And this was just one of the ways that it was killed. And now that individual is not in the legislature, and our former majority leader is now the Speaker, and he understands some of the.
I believe he's very supportive of getting this onto the House floor.
Agreed.
We're going to have some challenges on the Senate side to get it over there.
Certainly
But
will.
let's get it through the House. We'll work on the Senate. But I believe this will start in the House. We've got some time to work on the Senate side. I'll just say this. I think it's a starting point. I don't think it's a perfect bill. I think there's, let me say, to V.A. Bennett's point and to Judge Macias's point, I think that what we're lacking right now is this issue of discretion. It actually does have some some tough consequences must be meted out when someone does really bad things. And what this law did, it just simply says, these are children, let's not over-prosecute, let's not put them in jail. There's an assumption of causation, is a correlation, it becomes causation. It's a logic error to think that just because some kids spend a night in detention is going to cause them to go to prison. That's not true. In fact, actually, maybe the opposite is true.
I was going to say is, you talked about a few success stories, is the people come back and say, that was the best thing that happened to me. Send them over to detention. Now it really woke them up. And again, some of these successes, I may not live long enough to just find out what worked and what didn't work, for that matter. D. Bennett, Mark, do you remember we spoke together? That was three. I think the sheriff was there as well.
Out east.
Out east. And this was I probably hadn't been around very long, 3 years ago. And I tell you what, we all had different approaches to it, but there was the same virtually the same answer. And it ultimately came down to, and this is probably not very popular, it came down to parenting. We could do all kinds of things that you talk about, the community services and so on. By the time they get to us, sometimes the damage is so done, and as a judge, I make a terrible parent, to somebody else's kid, and the system does as well. But if there's going to be some money spent on preventative services, it's got to be, when they're little, when they're in, grade school or so on. But that's difficult because if it's a child needed care, we get criticized if we're removing children too fast from their parents who have constitutional rights. If we don't, and there's some injuries happen, we get criticized as well. So it's a delicate balance that we always have there. But if there's somewhere that we can help out before they get to the problem. One thing I'll just add is I get a lot of juvenile Judge Smith, I bet you did too, that they're 16, 15, 16, 17. There's no way they're going to graduate from high school. They are so far behind. If we force them to go, it's actually probably more problematic for the classroom and the teacher and the other students and so on. If there's some way where we can hopefully get them to learn some other skill, get in a trade or something, become a mechanic, this or whatever, something marketable, I think that's going to be far more valuable than, and they need to have the therapy and all that sort of thing. Something where they have the ability to make a living and not turn to crime.
Let me take 30 seconds, and I want to go back to Jay in just a second. I know you still want to talk as well, but I talk about legislation that costs money. Appropriations is very hard to pass. Appropriations that cost the legislature millions of dollars. They're very reluctant to pass those. But this is about policy. This is about what judges can do. There is a financial component of this. There's also a human component to this, because if you have a system that actually works, you save lives, you save property damage, you save human suffering because you have a system that actually works. And there's a cost of incarceration that we're not calculating right now. We're not even thinking about what that costs. And so this is a preventative, if we can have a prevention program that actually is effective, there's a huge savings to the Central County and the state of Kansas. So as I look to my colleagues and say, why is this important to Central County? This is not a bioscience building. This is not a workforce pipeline. There's a real human cost that impacts all the people in your community. And if we don't deal with this in some smart way to bring the pendulum back, to empower the right people and have the right laws, there is a huge cost to this economy and to our people and to the state of Kansas that is incalculable what's going on. So with that, and Jay, I don't know if you're going to talk about TBRI, but I think she has part of the answer here. She talks about prevention. I think the TBRI training that she talks about with the Gathered is a tremendous program that actually changes the way we approach this, saying more prevention. But please talk about whatever you want to talk about. It maybe as part of the TBRI program.
Yeah, there's two things. One, I think that Sedgwick County would benefit greatly from becoming an ACEs-informed community. So really looking at adverse childhood experiences and the score that becomes, because really that's going to translate into public health. It's going to into mental health. It's going to translate to our school and all those things. If you're not familiar with the work of Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, it's worth the 17 minutes on a YouTube video talking about ACEs. If not, the Child Advocacy Center of Sedgwick County has a beautiful 1-hour video that explains ACEs and why we really need to pay attention to that. It's a very quick assessment. We'd probably be surprised, or maybe not, the scores in this building or in this room right here with and what that can kind of look at as a trajectory for these people's lives. And really the one thing that makes a difference in that situation is one caring person that treats them like a human. So you can be a 10 on ACEs, and that kind of, if you don't have someone that's in your life to be a supportive person in your life, basically you're gonna, have a lot of terrible medical problems. You're gonna have mental health. You're drug addicted, probably drooling in the floor. Can't live. Full disclosure, I'm a 9. So I don't share that just to be flippant either. As far as TBRI, it's a program out of Texas Christian University and it talks about it's trust-based relational intervention. And what it does very quickly is it combines brain science with therapeutic intervention, and it helps people parent children from hard places. And really what you're doing is you're helping these families when they are little. And sometimes children can become dysregulated just because they weren't picked up enough and their brain didn't get the stimulation that it needed very, very quickly. So I'm on the board of Gathered, and what we really want to do is make sure that people who are caring for children have the access to the tools that they need to parent these children from hard places, because I do know that this room understands that it's hard to live in 2022 if you have any kind of barrier at all. So I really believe with everything that's in me that if we would really look at these things, the adverse childhood experience scores, and become an ACEs informed community, there's lots of research online that really it would be ridiculous for us not to look at this. But for sure, the TBRI training, I tried one intervention with my 16-year-old, he was 16 at the time, 16-year-old son while I was taking the training, because I just was like, I believe in it, but let me see if it really works, and it did. So
I don't know that this is legislative necessarily. I think there's another conversation should happen regarding TBRI, and maybe we should set that some opportunity for you. But today's discussion, and I invited you to talk about that, but today's discussion, I don't want to get the legislators when they go to Topeka in January to hit the ground running, knowing where Central County's support is. And so I know that there's been a lot of people who've had a chance to speak, and some of us have not had a chance to speak. I'd like to go around the room, starting over here, and go around. If you have something you want to say quickly, as I know people have to leave. Yes, sir, go right ahead.
Since I do have to leave, it looks like, I know for a fact, it's on our legislative agenda.
Right.
It looks like we've got the right people in the room to try and get it to a committee in the House. But we need everyone then to be up there and testifying before the House once it gets to that committee, and try and push it through the House. And then when it goes to the Senate, we need you all back there again, because when we speak all as one voice, they can start hearing us up in Topeka, and maybe we can get it over the finish line. But
I agree.
It's going to take all of the people in this room to go up and support the chairman and everyone else in the House and the Senate. So,
And I promise you this makes a difference in our community.
And I promise you it makes a difference when you show up, because last year we didn't have a ton of support because we were just really starting to work it. Now, the more support we have around this, the more people see, the better it'll be. Plus, when I look at the makeup of my committee, I have 5 freshmen on my committee on the Republican side, and we'll see what I get on the Democrat side. So there's also going to
start.
Thanks. Yeah, I know. I didn't get Leah or Cindy back, and I just got them warmed up to it. So it's going to also take some education. So the more people that can speak to it and help people understand the committee.
there are lobbyists in the room, but the lobbyists can't do it all.
No.
So we have to go up and speak.
Also, let's be clear, there are opponents to this.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
people out there that believe that any type of government, discipline on children is detrimental. That's their theory. And they're going to be there talking about how this isn't 367 didn't go far enough. It's too hard on children. They're going to be trying to get us to go even relax even more and find ways to go the other way even further. So this is not going to be a slam dunk. It comes back to ideology and philosophy. What do you think? I think kids need to have consequences that make sense. If they don't agree with that necessarily. Chairman Dennis, thank you for your time today. I appreciate you being here. I know that there's people in this room who haven't had a chance to speak, so I really want to make sure everyone has a chance to say what they want to say. So let's start over here. Mario, do you have anything you want to share?
I would just say that we have a lot of evidence-based programs out there, a lot of evidence-based practice programs out there. That's something that we talked about that we want to improve upon, get a lot of those grassroots agencies the funding that they need so they can start up and provide those services. But at the same time, we do have a staffing shortage across the country. So that seems to be one of the biggest issues is getting people in and then get those programs up and running so they can serve the clients that we have.
We just had Dr. What was her name? Dr. Craig Moreland came and talk about some of our programs, and I talked to her offline after that meeting, and I asked, is it true? We offer these programs, but it is voluntarily. These kids go into these things knowing it's their choice to be in the program. They might even go in and then drop out of the program. I'd say not all, obviously, but there's probably maybe even a slight majority of kids who choose not to go into the programs. They would rather just take whatever other consequences there are, which is pretty minimal. Usually 30 days in detention or whatever, or probation of some sort, but it's very minimal. And they just do their time and the case is closed and now they go. And so the programming, it doesn't get to all of the kids because they have a choice not to do it. And many times the parents don't want the kids to be involved in it again, I don't know why parents are this way. The parents are not supportive sometimes of the kids going through these programs. So it's a complicated thing. I think we have some good programs. The kids who go through the programs and complete the programs, I think they're very positive. But I think a lot of kids are being left out of that opportunity. So, okay. Anything else, Mario?
No.
Okay. Representative Howell.
I need to remind him of that when he's arguing. I'm going to be extremely brief and intentionally vague because this is about my family. But my family is closing in on close to 40 years now of having, through adoption, members of our family who we dearly love, who at least at some levels fall into these categories of what we're talking about. And TBRA training, and let me just say, we're talking about multi-generational members in our family. And TBRA training, which we didn't know about on the first generation, but we did know about on the second generation, it helped, but it has not been a cure. And over decades of time, we've come to realize that we're looking at multiple generation of what I, as an unprofessional, will term as genetic mental health issues that we don't know how to fix. Our culture does not have a cure. So, having good parents and good family members who are trying and taking the children to counseling and doing all these things has not resulted in making a situation not chronic and not generational. So I had two questions that I'm hoping somebody at this table has some information about, and maybe today is not the day, but I would very much welcome learning more and speaking with any of you. I'm just wondering, is there really a place within our system right now to actually diagnose, not just provide counseling for, but actual diagnosis of mental health for our children? Is that built into the structure of the system? And then do we have any idea, any kind of a metric of how many of these kids that are going on to commit violent crimes and hurting other humans, do we know how many of those are because of actual mental health issues that we don't know how to fix? And do we have any quantification of that? I would be very interested in learning more about that, or if that's something that we need to index to that.
The adult criminal system, how many people are in the adult criminal jails and prisons across the country are diagnosed with DSM-5 diagnosis. It's staggering. Whether they're correlated, one causes the other is another argument, but are they there? Absolutely.
I will just say on a personal level, I am currently in a position of, on a week by week, month by month, trying to decide balanced care of a minor very recently turned into an adult child versus elder care abuse for my parents. And the balance of those two issues. And there is no fix. There is no solutions that I can find, and it's very challenging. So this is personal to many of us. I know it's true. But
You asked a couple of questions. I don't think we'll get the answers
No,
to right at the
that's
moment.
okay, and that's okay.
I just want to say again, when you focus on the legislation at the moment, you have some great perspective. I don't know the answers to the questions, but if you know the answer to the questions, please.
Circle back.
If we have time, maybe we'll get back to that. Okay. So.
just privately, it's
All right,
totally
very,
fine.
I'm looking at Matt, Valerie, Eric, and Holly, all from St. Francis, regarding foster care. Anything you all want to say about what we talked about so far?
Yeah, so I'll probably start very briefly, and I know D.A. Bennett talked about the Mark Twain quote. I think what you're looking for is lies, damn lies, and statistics.
There you go.
You can use that same stat, except for replace it with kids who come through foster care. And there's a high percentage of people who end up in the prison system who go through foster care. So obviously what we want in our system is the right population. And ultimately what we want, and I know that we talked about TBRI a little bit too, is how do we prevent any child from ever entering any system? And so what are what's that safety or the societal things that we can do from an evidence-based practice? What are the prevention services that we can do, either true prevention or kind of first order prevention that we should be looking at? And obviously, Family First has helped with that. I know we've got lots of different choices out there, kind of to the point over there. We also have a workforce shortage, so we've got to find ways to identify all of those. The folks that are at me can obviously talk much more eloquently about, or at least personally, about what they've seen and witnessed when we have really high offender kids in our system, or kids who are obviously, you describe them as criminalistic. I think about assaultive or destructive behavior. So,
Chairman Owens, is there anything in play here that would help keep as Jay said, keep the corrections, the Department of Corrections youth out of the foster care system as a place to dump these kids? That's the word I heard.
Not really the way that 367 is worded, and our bill obviously doesn't address that.
Well, one thing we talked about in our paperwork that I handed out earlier is another residential option to fill in. I think we're missing one piece. We have a lot of good options out there, whether it be stay in the family with supports, TBRI, we have community-based programs, we have, if they do something really egregious, they get put in a correction system and they're prosecuted and probably go to speak at corrections at some point if they ever convicted. If they truly are a child needing care and they're safe to be placed in foster care, maybe we can, it's very, very minor offenses, maybe that's okay. But if you have very serious offenses and doesn't fit with the other places, we need to have a residential option.
Well, and that's where I spoke briefly about those juvenile crisis intervention centers is an initial place for these juveniles to be taken that are harm to themselves or others. And we're actually going to work on tweaking the language in that to where it expands it to behavioral health, not just mental health, so that it would be any child. And that's what I would encourage the county to look at, because the state is there's money sitting there to build these things. Now, the state in the past, actually KDOC in the past, has made that more challenging, and we have really instructed KDOC to back off on that because we want these things built. So Johnson County is looking at it. I would encourage Central County to look at it, and if you run into any barriers, let me know so that I can help.
One of the things we had before was that the Department of Juvenile Corrections stripped us of our license. They won't even let us do it. So even though the county maybe had a desire to do so, the Department of Corrections, Juvenile Corrections, refused to let us have our license.
Well, I just spent the morning with Secretary Zmuda and his entire staff over at El Dorado. Okay. So I can assure you, if something was stripped and we need to get it back to build these things, we can have those conversations.
It's hard to build up something from scratch, but Dave, if you had a comment.
I just going to say one other thing here that you touched on, Stephen, that is there's another third rail to all of this. We have this juxtaposition between JO and SYNC as if those are the only two options. We're trying to ram square pegs through round holes. We do the same with adult court as well. The people who are mentally ill, who are, acting out and doing things violently. Chapter 59 applies to adults and the good care treatment provisions for people who are endangering themselves or others. Use that term of art. There's not really a corollary in the juvenile court. If I'm an attorney and I come before Judge Macias and I say, this kid's not tracking. I mean, he's just not able to talk to me. We don't really have a mechanism for the way we do for adult court, where we go to ComCare and then you go to state hospital and you have these competency evaluations. You try to get a local evaluation. If somebody's incompetent at some point, we all kind of look at each other in the juvenile court and just try to figure out a way to get the thing resolved. It is time in this state that we reassess Chapter 59. We come up with a corollary in the juvenile court and we redo the one on the adult side as well. Because right now, if you are a danger to yourself or others, I can hold you for a minimal amount of time and also automate or run it, and you're right back on the street, which is what we're doing with those. These humans, they graduate to 18 and then they're literally dumped not into the sink, but onto Main Street.
Chairman Owens, he just went over my head a little bit. Did you get what he just said?
I understand what he said.
I'm
And
gonna
I'm
trust
more
you
than
for
happy
that,
to
what
work
he
with
said.
you.
I don't know what you just.
Work on that, especially since we're moving forward with building a state hospital in Sedgwick County.
A referral
So-
to the judicial council is probably in order. I could drive to Bill, send it to
Do
you,
it.
and it would cause a brought to you, I can't say what it calls, but a storm. But the judicial council will work on it for the next year.
And they're always looking for things, so I've
Let's
had
get the
a
ball
couple of
started.
good reviews. So send that over to me, what questions you need answered, what we want to review, and we can make that request for me.
Very good, thank you.
Okay, coming back over to St. Francis. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I would just say that I am glad that we're having this discussion. And really, kids having consequences for their behavior really is key. And I can speak to myself and the staff on Harry Street and the violence that we witness on a daily basis. It really is, it's hard. And I always tell, I'm TBRA trained, but I always tell when I work with foster parents and other people that, the behaviors really don't necessarily define who the kid is, but really just understanding the why. The why behind the behavior is extremely important. And so, but it is hard when you reach out for the resources that are available and everyone's hands are tied. My hands are tied. I can't do this. I can't do that. And I was actually, it was on Tuesday, I believe, we had two kiddos who went around to big lots and robbed a drug dealer, came right back to the office and with a handgun. Came back to the office. The police were there. They searched the kids. They didn't find anything on them, and I asked the officers to ask the kids to remove their shoes. They removed their shoes and they found the drugs. Same kids this week. What's today? It was today. Okay, so that was Tuesday. So this morning, the same kids went and robbed someone and was able to get access to a handgun. And so they had a handgun. And so they were actually picked up this morning. But it's just ongoing every day. The type of incidents that are occurring due to the lack of consequences. And the kids will tell you, no one can do anything to us. They can't.
Kids will say that to the judge. My people tell me that they'll say that to the judge.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, well, but they will say it. I mean, they'll even tell the cops when the cops are out at our facility that no one can do anything to us. And then when they leave and we're there with the kids, I mean, it just confirms. And so, and I mean, there's story after story after story, but I really am glad that we're having this conversation. I think these are our children and they are our future.
I think it happens to them until they turn 18, then the world comes apart,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So we're doing them a disservice by think that way because there's consequences in the future.
For sure.
All right, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. We're gonna have to go around the table kind of quickly here, but let's see. We have Erica. Thank you.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I've got to step out in 2 minutes to go get on another Zoom meeting that I'm.
Let's give you a chance to speak. Any final comments for you, Chairman
No,
Owens?
if it is the committee's will that you support 2200, that is how I plan on reintroducing it. if there, as amended, as we amended it last year. So if there are additional changes you would like to see or additional pieces that we need to add to it, I welcome those. I welcome that conversation. I have known for 4 years that we've needed to work on this, and every year it was one barrier or another. And I think this is the year that we can.
Let me invite the room. If you have an amendment to what we've talked about so far, you say, I think we're missing a little piece. I haven't had a chance to really get kind of. Please work that up. Send it to me. I will collect those and get them to Chairman Owens. I think the reality is this room has a lot of brilliance here. We will we'll collect up our ideas here. If we need to make some recommended changes, we'll come talk to you about that.
That's great.
Let's plan on probably a bill hearing. I'm going to guess in January sometime.
Yeah, my goal with our committee makeup, we're going to have to spend some time educating, which isn't my favorite part because I like to just get to work. But people have got to know what they're working on. So it probably towards the end of January, mid to end of January is when we'll have it.
And even if you legislators are not on the committee, you are encouraged to leave your committee wherever you are and testify on that committee when the bill comes up for hearing.
Always.
As well as everybody in this room. Everybody else in this room. If you're not aware of it, I will email you and tell you when the hearing is going to happen.
And you can even testify remotely.
Absolutely, even better. I will encourage you to write your testimony down. Don't wait until they schedule a hearing, because when they schedule a hearing, you may only have a day to let them know whether you're going to testify or not. So get your stuff ready today. We don't even know the bill number yet, but you need to start today to plan ahead and be engaged in the hearing. If he has 40 people saying, we got to make this bill needs to pass, and then 3 people from Appleseed show up, we will make an impression. We will get it to move forward. So let's engage with passion to move this idea forward. Chairman Owens, thank you for your time.
No, thank you
If
very
there's
much.
anything else happens the rest of this meeting, I'll encourage you to, we'll let you know, and you can watch the YouTube video or whatever, or get you whatever final comments we have today.
That's wonderful.
You need to leave?
I appreciate it. I'm going to go find someplace.
Just real quickly, for those of you that have to leave, any comments?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time with Jay Hedrick and Judge Smith on the topics of foster care and advocacy for the family. We've seen in the last 3 years, we've absolutely seen how this has put a significant burden on foster families. That was my focus walking into all of this, was how do we best alleviate the pressure from the foster families, but also to help target these children. These are human beings, these are children that need help. Now in a different role, I have the opportunity to advocate on a bigger level, and I intend to do so very loudly to advocate for these kids and these processes. I know we're talking about 367, the legislative process, but there's more that we can do at the county. And there's more that we can do for the business community, the faith-based community. We've all got to be involved because this is a community effort, and these children need us in a big way. So.
Commissioner Beatty, thank you for your comments and appreciate you being here today.
Thank you.
And Judge Smith, you know you got to go. Any comments you want before you walk out?
I would just say right after the testimony on 367, Appleseed got up and said that I've always been against juveniles. So.
Have you? Verify.
That's the bottom line. Is you try to tweak these programs to actually deal with these systems. There's going to be some pushback.
Yeah, the proponent's going to go first, and the opponents usually get the last word. So what they say about us, they usually get to say what they want. So, all right, thank you guys for coming. Working around the table. Anybody? I know Holly, you have or anybody else over here? I'll say Francis.
Yeah. Well. I just want to give them, I think foster care really struggles. When we do have some of these juveniles, we have to remember that we are rehabilitating an entire family. It's not just the one child. So you have to take into account relapse. You have to take into account that we need to have an immediate consequence. So the quick dip that is proposed in there is great. We need an opportunity where this kid has a pending charge. Let's say he does screw up. Let's say he screwed up 3 times and we need to get him into detention. He needs to have a little time out. To get out.
Quick dip, please describe what that is. Is it allowed now or not allowed now? What's that? What is it exactly?
So a quick dip is an idea that you quickly dip into detention and then you're out. It's a deterrent. It's a deterrent. So it's quick. It's 24 hours. It's 48 hours. It's using the adult side on probation. It's great. I had guys on probation that they would do stretches of time where they had 8 months of doing a good job, and then they would screw up. They'd have a dirty UA. They'd get incarcerated for a couple of days and they would come out and they'd eventually finish probation. We don't have the opportunity right now to even say that to a juvenile, to say, hey, stop smoking weed, stop smoking weed. Okay, we've done a drug and alcohol assessment. You're getting drugs at your treatment center now. We have no way to even get them in detention to have a timeout.
I'm gonna make that number 6 here, quick dip. Sounds funny, doesn't it? Well, you know what that means, and I think that needs to be part of our tools in the toolbox. Judge Macias, you have something else?
Well, I suppose that, when we sanction, we could do it up to 30 days We can do it much shorter than that, but it requires us graduated sanctions. And sometimes we need a quick dip before that, because then they've done some really.
Well, again, all they got to do is shoplifting, and you want to do it 24 hours in a detention.
Something like
At least you
that.
have the option, right?
Right, yeah,
Okay.
right.
One other thing that I thought about, and I've thought about this over the past few years, and this is real fast. I just want to say, when 367 started, at the time I was not working for St. Francis. I was the high-level public defender for juveniles. So I was traveling around the state. So 367 drastically impacted my life at that time. I was the only attorney that was traveling around doing high-level felonies. The entire time I was told, even when testimony was going on, it's going to be great because there's going to be all this funding that's going to go to your population where they will receive evidence-based programs. And I've heard time and time again about this funding, and I've yet to see the programs. So I practiced for probably 3 years, and I never had any adolescent juvenile program that was an intensive program geared towards substance abuse or sexualized behaviors. Sexualized behaviors and those violent behaviors, while they are a very small population, there is no rehabilitation services even when they are young. When they are 6, 7, 8 years old and of that mindset, there's no ability to have a diagnosis to have them hospitalized for a long term when you can see that this kid is not going to get any better.
Defense attorney.
That's what I was just listening to. Yeah, that's shocking. You know, she has perspective that is really, really important here.
The entire time, several of us sat there. Wait, did I say prosecuting?
No,
I don't. Okay.
You said you're a public defender.
Did I screw up? I just spent years waiting, and I switched hats, right? So now I'm not just defending juveniles. Now I'm on the child welfare side. We need to be able to have these resources, and we don't have the resources. For
So what you're saying is, if I
we
understand
have no
correctly,
consequences.
the programs that we offer through our corrections, none of them are geared towards those types of offenders.
No.
Not at all. So we're lacking something entirely.
We started 5 years ago with some resources. We had drug court, we had substance abuse treatments for juveniles, we had programs, we had JRF, we had shelter. If you look through our code, you read through our own code, and statutorily it says place them in a juvenile residential facility, place them in shelter, place them in a staff secured facility. We don't have those in our community. We don't have the ability to place our kids anymore in JRF. So that quick dip idea, what House Bill 22 does give us some opportunity to quickly detain kids, but also sometimes they need to live in a juvenile residential facility, and we can support them, and we can support the family to where they are done inside of a juvenile residential facility. We can transition them back into their home. And at the time, we're working on parenting. So we have to, as the child welfare provider, we have to tap into multiple resources, substance abuse, mental health, but we sometimes don't have those resources at all.
I think your perspective is what we need to hear today. Thank you for sharing that. I think we have some opportunities. I don't know if that needs to be part of the legislation or that just needs to be a discussion with Deep KDOC and get this started. I'm not sure where we have to go with your observation that we're lacking these things. I don't know how you get these things started.
I think the legislative component is one. I think within our community here, we've got to be collaborative. We've got to come together and really look at realistically what options and resources we have in our own Central County community.
And Eric, are you from Central County?
Yes.
Perfect. We might want to talk some more later. And then Holly.
Yeah, I will not take up any time. I just want to thank everyone for this, and I look forward to individual or more group meetings with everyone here.
And again, thank you for being a part of the reason why we're here today. You helped set this up, so appreciate you so much. And then we have Kristen. You've not said anything yet today. I'm sure you might. And by the way, let me just say, you're from DCF. Let me just say, it's easy to criticize DCF. I don't want to do that today. You have a very hard job. You have to live within the law, just like foster has to live within the law, just like judges have to live within the law. I think there's opportunities to change, but I guess I don't want to be highly critical, because I don't think that's the point. That's not why we're here today. You're doing everything you possibly can in accordance with the law you've been given. So please share.
Well, I didn't have a lot that I could rehash and restate that's already been said. My seat at DCF is Foster Care Adoption Independent Living Services. That's my program. And within that, we have what we call cross-systems youth. So it's youth duly involved with the juvenile offender system and the child in need of care system. And that's kind of what we're talking about today. I would just say foster care really it's designed to be a last resort to protect children who are being harmed, abused, neglected. And what I think we often are is a catch-all when we don't know what to do.
Right.
When we have parents like Ms. Smith, who talked about earlier, who who don't know how to keep their children safe. We have a position. We work really closely with Mario and his group, and we have a position at DCF, and her role is strictly, it's a cross-systems youth facilitator, and what she's been doing is tracking data about who these kids are. And we know that kids with, and I might be misspeaking, but domestic battery situations where there's something that happens in their home, whether it be their foster home, their residential facility, or their biological parent home, that's our most challenging population to figure out what to do with. Something's happened, parents have been hurt, there's fear of safety for other kids in the home, parents are saying we can't take them back, but we don't have a place to put them. And this is
That's why they spend the night in some offices once in a while. Do that once in a while.
well, and why
There's no place else to
they
put these
why they
kids.
come into foster care, because we have a mom saying I can't take this kid back home, and we are not a system that's designed to give consequences. We don't have it within our child needed care home. We don't code within our system. And I will say that this is really about, it's a community effort to look at families as a whole. Like one of you said it, like kids don't grow up in isolation, and we've got to figure out how do we take care of the family as a whole so kids can stay home and we can address these needs. But foster care is not the answer for how we do better by kids.
I'm gonna try to speed this up a little bit, but I do want to ask you, Kristen, and the 4 members from DCF or St. Francis, do you feel empowered or do you feel that you are able to testify on changes to the state that would address this issue of putting troubled youth that are in the Department of Corrections that are being placed in foster care? Do you feel like you can speak to that issue in the legislature and actually be part of the voice that says this is the way we should do this for these kids? Are you allowed to speak up and say that?
There's probably a few others that have to clear that before I say one way or the other.
Your voice is absolutely, it's a critical voice to be heard. Let me ask you to please work on that. If you need help getting permission or whoever needs to say that's a good idea, I think your voice is absolutely must have at the legislature. And I think St. Francis, same thing. You're a must have voice. You have to show up. If you can, I don't know how else to say, but we need you to be at the table when this bill happens.
So the Children's Alliance of Kansas is all the other providers similar to us and a whole lot of providers across Kansas. And I know this is really their legislative focus this year too. So the Children's Alliance will be probably supplying some testimony, Jim.
Okay, thank you. Jay, any last words you want to share?
Just thank you for listening and not kicking me out.
I love your passion. Jay, I love your passion, and I think you have a very important perspective. I don't know that how the legislation will necessarily tie into the things you've shared today, but I do think that you're a community expert on how to deal with this at a very human level, and you have some ideas that I think are really critical. So thank you for being at the table today. Representative Miller.
I'll keep it real brief too. I want to thank you first of all for inviting me to be a part of this conversation as well. It's something really important to me as well, personally and professionally, and I look forward to getting more involved with it as well and learning more every day. I've got a few people in my life right now that are various levels of impacted by, in good ways and bad ways, the limitations from the state.
Well, I'm going to look to you to be very helpful to hopefully carry this message to both sides of the aisle. I think I love the fact that you're here today. I know you care deeply for this topic, and at the end of the day, we can't do this without you. So please continue to stay engaged. Judge Macias.
I said enough, if not too much, but I will say this. Also, what hurts the foster placement is there's a prohibition on this 367 to keep a child detained just because there's no other place to send them. You can't even do that. So we have to send them over to foster care. So that's one of the problems in 367, even when they need to be detained, perhaps. And the other thing is, all I will say is, Mark, you got some good assistant DAs out there. And I think they do absolutely the best they can with what they have to work with. And so really, the whole idea is we're all trying to work together here, and it's not that we're out there trying to punish kids. How do we make them better citizens when they get adults? Otherwise, they're downtown, and the consequences are far worse.
Well, thank you for being here today. Your perspective is critically needed. We need to understand what you're dealing with, and hopefully we can get you guys some spectrum to have more discretion on how to help these kids. I think we have to trust our judges. And right now, we've limited it down to say it's a one-size-fits-all. We don't really trust you. We're going to tell you what you have to do, and we take all your tools out of the toolboxes. So I think what we have to do, is empower our judges to be smart and make the right decisions in each and every single case that comes before you. So
The best we can.
that's my hope.
All right. Thank you.
Representative Howard, any comments or thoughts?
Maybe a couple questions. I am happy to be on the Child Welfare and Foster Care Committee this year, as well as Representative Howell. We both are on there, so I'm excited to delve into these issues a little more. So you said 20% of the cases statewide, same cases, I'm assuming, are in Sedgwick County?
Yeah, I was looking at the data. There's some, I actually have it with me. There's some great, this breaks it down by county.
My question is what is the percentage of the cases that we're talking about today of that 20%?
We are collecting that data. By January 15th, we are to have that data. So I couldn't tell you today,
like
what percentage.
Half, 25%.
Well, since we're an urban city
I'm
seem to
just
have a greater
curious.
problem here. They're 18% of the state's population, so I would expect to be at least 18%, maybe a little higher.
You know, but this is a good document here because it shows by county, it shows the child population per county.
Okay.
It shows the number of kids living in poverty, the percentage, and then it shows what you are out of home. So similar, Johnson County has more child population than we do. They have 7% of their kids in out of home care.
Oh, it's 20% out of home placement.
20% out of home.
Out of county placements, what you said.
No, excuse
Out
me.
of
Out of home. 20%. There's 6,300 kids in foster care in Kansas. Okay, Sedgwick County has 1,300. So 20% of all kids come out of our county. And when you look at other, this is an interesting document to look at when you look at the other large counties.
And so how many of that 1,300 are?
I don't have an exact number on that, but we
You have a
are
ballpark?
we are internally collecting that.
100, 200?
Oh, hundreds.
More than that?
Yeah.
Hundreds? Okay.
Yes.
I'm just trying to get an idea of the magnitude of the.
Our goal is to have that data to the children, all the providers across Kansas to have that before session starts because we know that's okay.
I'll say this, I think the problem is worse in Sedgwick County because it is an urban county. I think that you're gonna see bigger problems in urban
Right,
counties.
and that makes sense to me, so.
Just so like.
All right, so.
Yeah, and I just thank you for, I'm looking forward to the conversation. This is the first I've actually kind of heard of that, so heard of other issues, but not this one specifically. But I was in corrections last year, so I did do the bill, so.
The other document we put around is we worked in collaboration, all of the providers in DCF, and we realized that people don't really understand what the role of foster care is, and so we did kind of a fact and myth sheet. I think people think that you put a kid in foster care, they get more services. You put a kid in foster care, they get moved up on the list. So we did this little fact and myth sheet, which has been helpful for providers. And then we've done a couple year study with an outside firm that really talks about why are kids moving so often. So that's what that second document is. So I hope you all can look at that. It really talks about why there's instability and there's a lot of talk of lack of system community readiness.
DA, isn't there a correlation also between foster care and incarceration? No.
If you want to look at it that way, but again, what else is going on? If you're in foster care, it's because you've been abused, neglected, et cetera.
Exactly.
Was it the act of being in foster care that put
I know.
set you on the trajectory, or is it what happened to you in your home?
Right.
I don't think it has a damn thing to do with it.
I agree with you completely. I just want to say I've heard that. And
I'd point out one of the things on the subject, some of the newer legislators, this one-size-fits-all notion isn't just a one-size-fits-all for the kids that come in the courts across the state, it's one-size-fits-all with respect to jurisdictions. When you look at this is the front page of Wichita Public Schools, they have 47,000 students in Wichita Public Schools, overcoming obstacles. 78.7% of students in the USD 259 come from homes of poverty. I can tell you who was on the board, who was on the group who got behind and pushed and rammed this thing through the legislature. It was a judge from Johnson County and a prosecutor from Norton County. Okay? They did not invite anyone from Sedgwick County to be a part of this. Shawnee County or Wyandotte County, the three biggest jurisdictions that deal with the most poverty and family violence and all these other things. Sedgwick County has more domestic violence, according to the FBI statistics, than the other 104 counties combined. The year leading up to the passage of 367, our average stay at JDF, and correct me if I'm wrong, was 54 beds a night. There's 47,000 students in USD 259. Ignore Mays, Derby, Goddard, all the others. Just USD 259, 54 kids per night. That was the maximum on average, of course, in the year leading up to the passage of 367. My question to the House, because the Senate would not let us speak hardly. We have 1 hour testimony compared to 3 days of proponent testimony. 1 hour in the Senate in opposition. That's what we were given. We turned into a shouting match. We went into the House and pulled every ounce of thing we could and got several House members who were, this bill 367 is exponentially better than it would have been if it hadn't been for some House members who were ready to stand up to the Senate and give us a chance to fix it. The original draft was far worse.
Yeah.
And my question I asked there was 54. I don't remember what the statistics are. I'm terrible at statistics. But the numbers were, less than 1% of 1% of the kids in Sedgwick County were, I'm like, where is the need for the wholesale destruction of the juvenile justice system in Kansas? That was and I was told the die has been cast.
Yeah, I'll just tell you, it's a national movement. NCSL and CSG have pushed this nationwide. It's not just in Kansas, it's all over the country. And I think there's legislators who are looking for ways to save money. It's tempting for them to support programs that theoretically save money, but what you end up with is a much more ineffective system, which wasn't really fully understood when they embraced 367. They thought it was going to be peaches and cream with no problems, no downside. It's all upside, and it was completely used car sales. It was not at all what they said it was.
Okay, just a couple last things. It would help if you could get some other counties, this, when you go and testify to come on board. So if you guys could work on your counterparts in other counties around the state, because they can put pressure on those senators and representatives as well that represent them. And then maybe some talking points once this gets out that you can send to the people from Sedgwick County that we can help.
The problem is getting an audience, and I agree with you completely.
Right.
That's why the DA's Association, which is a statewide organization, the Sheriff's Association, statewide, the Judicial Association, I think there is such a thing, statewide. These are conversations should be happening in these larger organizations, not just Sedgwick County. County Commission has had debate on whether this should even be on our platform at all. And by the way, you look at the Chamber platform, GWP platform, City of Wichita platform, and on it goes. This doesn't exist on anybody else's platform at all. It's only on this platform because, I'll just say, I pushed a hard conversation. I've kept this thing alive a little bit. I finally got a commission who actually let it stay on the platform. But I've been talking about this for 4 or 5 years now. And so at the end of the day, I can't get an audience to realize how big of a deal this is. This impacts everybody in Central County. This impacts people going into the adult penitentiary system. Again, the cost of this is incalculable. So it is extremely important that we realize the cost of what we've done. And right now, no one's even thinking about it because we're so focused on other things. And so it's hard to get an audience. I completely agree with you, though.
I appreciate you bringing it to light. This is great.
We have Nathaniel from Watkins. You are a lobbyist today, right?
Yes, and really I would just reiterate what you said, Commissioner. The biggest thing is going to be the advocacy, because the most impactful voices are those closest to the issue. And as you mentioned, also having the DA come in and ask for more stern handling of these juveniles might not come off as well as having the people that are actually sitting around with these kids. And so the advocacy is really what will.
Well, thank you for that. I look forward to. I look forward to having professional lobbyists help on this as well. I know you're going to be engaged in. Jason and Jessica do a great job as well. So they're professional lobbyists that are going to help us move this ball. Every single year we've been on the commission, I've been on the commission, any non-appropriation bills or policy, we've almost always got at least 1 or 2 of these things through the legislature every single year. I think this is our bill. We've got to get this done this year. And it will help our kids across the state. So it's I don't know if there's much out there more important than human cost, right? Yeah. DA Bennett, any last words? No. Well, listen, thank you for your time being here today. I know you're very, very busy. Sheriff Easter wanted to be here. He said he would be here. I'm sure he had something come up today, I'm sure. But having these folks support is critical. And he's truly he's a wonderful DA. He's done everything he can to get this thing on the right side, and his staff has been tremendous. So I want to say thank you for your support, for your participation and attendance today. Thank you so much.
And thank you for your work on the Substance Abuse Mental Health Coalition, because that goes hand in hand with what we're talking about, as you know, with the workforce issues and everything. So you've been instrumental with that as well.
If you all don't know Sedgwick County Manager Tom Stoltz, he's right here. He's been listening to me basically talk about this for too long. Any comments you want to make?
I do, just real quickly. Y'all signed this, thank you. I'm gonna be reaching out to some of you. The only thing I know how to do is put light of day on this, and the commission currently has a monthly workshop time designated. We're probably gonna actually start going to 2 days per month. I would like some of you to come into that workshop, which is in the commission world, is a laid back kind of venue, kind of like this, where you just kind of sit around and have discussions. I'd really like to have some of you come back, and I'll be reaching out to you since I have your contact information now, and get you into a staff with commission. Because we were lucky enough to have 3 commission, two and a half commissioners. Right? So we got a leg up, but all commissioners need to.
I do be the missing commissioners today. We'll take time to watch this meeting today. It's been recorded, it's streamed, and so. Is there anybody else behind me that feels like they have anything they want to say before we end this meeting? I'd like to end here in a couple of minutes. Is there anybody else behind me that has a burning comment?
I would, just for a minute.
Okay.
My name's Trish Bryant. I'm with St. Francis. You know, I've worked in child welfare for more than 35 years. We've watched as systems have gone on. We all want to do the best by children and families. And really, a lot of people said it, prevention. You know, we have to change what we're doing now with this bill is going to be the first step, but we've got to focus on prevention for the future for the children, because until we're able to do that, we're going to continue to struggle on the back end of things. So, you know, DCF is doing a good job working with us and providing some programs, and we'd like to get more of that information out to you and the other legislators as well. So, thank you. And thank you for your time.
And I would say, I'm Dave Thorne with Gather as well. The failures from using 7 are still our failures. And there's been talk at the end of this about this is our community, these are our children. What we don't have actionable from this workshop, and what we get to is some actions we can all take in this community to move things forward here, not waiting on the bills and the other things. There's current funding, there are other things that seem to be actionable. We just need to get to the point where we know what those actions are.
Let me just say this, even though you guys are behind me, you're important to me. We didn't have more room at the table, but please, if you want to help move some of this ideas forward, please be ready to testify on House Bill 2200, whatever that bill is going to be this year, and stay engaged. I will email you as well when I have information about when this bill gets a hearing scheduled. So I'll write. I will let you know if you guys want to participate. I would love to have your support as well.
I'd like to point out Rusty Neath. I didn't know he was here.
I just saw him back there.
He is Public Safety Director at Corrections is in his division. He's testified a number of times. He's very aware of the situation. So if you don't know Rusty, you can see him in the face there, and that's who he is. You'll see him again. So.
Thank you, Rusty, for being here. Any comments you want to make?
I think it's all been said. I went to an adult graduation the other night for Next Step Unlocked, which is a vocational program for probationers that are on adult probationers. And a common theme in all of those stories was a lack of support during their childhood that led to criminal behavior as an adult, which led to troubles that they're now trying to recover from. So everything that's been said here is spot on in my opinion.
All right, final call. All right, everyone, thank you for being here today. Appreciate your time, and stay engaged. You got 1 minute, Mark.
I am.